Where do the New York Giants as a franchise need to show the most progress? I'll give you a few goals that I'd like to see met coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for Giants Country over on Fan Nation. And I want to send a special welcome on this Friday edition of the Locked On Giants podcast to my everydayers, to my Blue Crew community members, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. You are all appreciated and loved by yours truly. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, look, we all know it. The Giants have a lot of work to do this offseason to get this roster fixed. And while it might be a little too early to set statistical goals, but there are some macro goals that we can set for this team, goals that will indicate that the Giants are headed in the right direction. So we're going to talk about a few of those to start off the program. And then we're going to transition into segment 2 to talk about Brian Daboll. Now, Brian Daboll, I've been doing a lot of thinking about, the reports of his behavior, his sideline demeanor, and all that stuff. And I'm sure Coach Daboll doesn't listen to this podcast, but if he is, by some stroke of luck or misfortune, whatever I want to call it, I have some thoughts on how he can grow as a coach moving forward. Something that's very basic, something that he's certainly capable of doing, and something that I would hope he would do, not just for the sake of, his own health, but also for the sake of the health of the team. So that'll be segment 2. And then we'll wrap things up in segment 3 with why it does make sense for the Giants to run it back with Daniel Jones this year. And I know a lot of you are probably groaning and saying, what are you talking about, Pat? Why would you want to run it back with Daniel Jones again? I'm going to explain why. And I have some reasons that I think make sense, but I'll let you guys be the judge of it, as you always are on the content here on Locked On Giants. So as always, again, thank you. Let's get into it. We've got a lot to cover. All right. We're going to start off with realistic turnaround goals. Now, I get a lot of questions from listeners and from readers from Giants Country. What are my predictions for this player's stat? What do I think the Giants win-loss record's going to be? What do I think, this guy's stat's going to be? And I don't usually like to, make those predictions because it's just too early. And, quite honestly, it's too early to say, what the one-loss record is. We don't even know what the roster's going to look like. But in thinking about what represents progress for this Giants team, I think we could all agree that this past season, 2023, the Giants took a step back. So what do they need to show? What do they need to work for to convince everybody that the direction, that the arrow is headed in the right direction? So I have a few things here. The first thing, obviously, is you want to see them get more wins than they did last year. Now, last year they were 6-11. The year before they were 9-7-1. So for me, considering that first year was kind of a surprise, if you're the Giants, the first thing you want to do is you want to aim for at least 9 wins. Ideally, you want to get to 10 wins if you can. And really, there's no reason why they can't if they make the right moves, if they stay healthy. I mean, they're going to have an easier schedule this year, by virtue of where they finished. They probably are not going to be featured on primetime a lot like they were last year. I would hope at least they wouldn't be. You guys know how I feel about primetime games, but, let's be honest, the Giants they're not ready for primetime. So hopefully they won't be featured as much on primetime games. And, they're going to have some new pieces, obviously, that are going to need to gel. And, I've talked before about getting the team ready to play for the season. And, I go back to last season and I'll say this until I'm blue in the face. I don't feel that the Giants were ready to start the season last year. I did not like how, Brian Dable set up training camp and how, they came out against Dallas and they were flat and they got punched in the mouth and they never recovered from that. And I attribute that to how they were prepared in the summertime. So, there's little things obviously we can talk about down the line, and we will talk about, down the line, but there's no reason why, if the Giants change up a few things, if they get some more talent in there, better coaching than when they've had at certain positions, there's really no reason why they can't get back to at least 9 wins and ideally get into the double-digit win column for the first time since I think 2016. So, that would be, the first thing I would want to see from the Giants to know that, the franchise is headed in the right direction. Okay. The next thing, and this is so important, and I keep beating the drum about this, is I want to see the Giants finish the 2024 season with a winning record in the NFC East. They have not had that in some time now. All right. Last year, the Giants finished 3-3 in the NFC East, 2 wins over Washington, the 1 win over Philadelphia. I need to see them start winning the division games. All right. If they've got any chance of, getting into the postseason, getting decent seeding, they have got to start winning in the division. And, last year we were optimistic. We were hoping that they had closed the gap with Dallas and Philadelphia, and we found out that they didn't. This year, they've got to close those gaps, and they've got to start being in positions to win those games. All right. And then the last thing that I think is going to represent the biggest, sign of progress for this football team. And this is kind of, fundamental, but we did not see it last year, is we need to see progress from week to week to week amongst just not only players, but units. Now, you've heard me say before on this show that progress is never linear. It's not. It's going to go up and down, but you want to start see it going gradually up, dipping just a little bit and just continuing to go up. All right. So take, for example, the offensive line. Can we sit here and say that the Giants offensive line looked better by week 17 than it did week 1? I don't think we can. I mean, we saw the problems with picking up stunts. We saw the problems with dual blocking and whatnot, pass protection and all that stuff. The offensive line never got better. All right. Special teams never really got better. It was inconsistent in a lot of areas, and they just never improved there. Daniel Jones, who we'll talk about a little later on in the program, never really, started to go up. He was more on the downward slide. He had really, you could say, maybe 2 good quarters of football. And, I know people are going to say, well, there were injuries and that factored in, but no, folks, you got to look at the other stuff there, which we'll talk about, a little later on in the program. So you've got to see across the board, the Giants starting to, the stocks going up. There's going to be weeks where it's going to be bad. Every team has a clunker. The idea is not to have a lot of clunkers. So if the Giants can gradually show progress to where they are a better team in week 17 than they were in week 1 of the season, they're headed in the right direction. So those are the 3 main areas where I'm going to be looking for a turnaround, where I think it is realistic to have a turnaround. Now, obviously, once we get the players in here and we know what the roster is going to look like, we can talk about, stat projections and bold predictions and all that other good stuff. But these are the 3 main goals that if you're the Giants, you kind of circle on your to-do list and you say, okay, what do we need to do? What players do we need? What talent do we need? What coaching schemes do we need to accomplish these goals? All right, coming up next, Brian Dable. You talk about growth, you talk about progress. What can he do differently so that maybe he can mitigate some of the ill will that kind of popped up this off season. We'll talk a little bit about that. And spoiler alert, it's something he already does with the players that he needs to do and expand upon. So we'll talk about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, NFL's off season. What off season? Pretty soon we're going to have the combine, the free agency period, the draft, and then spring OTAs. And it's going to be a busy and productive time. And boy, am I thankful for DoorDash. Those days when there is no time to cook or when I need a delivery from my local pharmacy or grocery store, I know I can depend on DoorDash to bring me what I need when I need it. DoorDash is fast, easy, and convenient. Just download their app, find the establishment from which you want to order, and select from the menu options. You'll get what you ordered or they'll make it right. So the next time you're in a pinch and you need something right away, let DoorDash deliver for you. DoorDash, your door to more. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, P-Train. And next week on the Locked On Giants podcast, I'm working on my big show, which is making the case. Should the Giants go draft, free agency? And if so, who should they pick to fill some of these position needs that they have on their roster? So that's a show that I'm planning to roll out next week. I'm also hoping to have one of the NFL Network draft analysts on the show next week. I put in a request and I have an idea who it's going to be. I'm just waiting to see if that individual is available. So we'll have that individual on when that's all confirmed, and we'll talk draft. We'll get an idea of, the upcoming combine. We'll preview the combine a little bit, and we'll cover that, of course, because that is a hot topic and a lot of questions regarding the draft and whatnot. But first, let's talk about Brian Daboll. All right. Now, whether you believe some of the reports that came out about Daboll's intensity, his sideline antics, his behavior behind the scenes, that's, I'm not here to tell you what to believe and what not to believe. I think you all are intelligent. You all have eyes. You all saw what you saw. So I'm not going to sit here and try to paint a rosy picture or try to whitewash anything. I won't do that to you. That being said, I do believe, and this is just my belief here now, Daboll is a little too intense for his own good. Now, in a way that's good because, when you want to win badly, you don't want to, lie down and accept, for example, a bad call by the officials. You want to debate it, have a spirited debate, if you will, within reason. But where it gets a little dicey for me, and this is where I hope Daboll, as a teacher, and he does pride himself in being a teacher, you go out and you practice, and if your players screw up, instead of popping off at them, you teach. All right. And that's where I think Daboll needs to really grow as a head coach, amongst other spots. But I'm talking about strictly his demeanor. We know he's a fiery type. We know he's a passionate guy. I've asked him about, in the past about popping off and how he balances it. And he kind of like joked a little bit about it. But in all seriousness, you can't keep popping off at people. All right. If you're a teacher, and I'm talking about a school teacher, university professor, whatever, if your students make a mistake, what good is it going to do you if you stand there and you berate them and you chastise them and you embarrass them in front of their classmates? What's that going to accomplish? I'll tell you what it's going to accomplish. Nothing. It's going to make you a hated person. And it's going to create a barrier between yourself and your pupils. And I think, one thing Daboll, and he's still, even though he's been in the coaching ranks now for quite some time, I think over 20 years, he's still a relatively new head coach. And one of the things he needs to learn is that same approach that you take with the players, which is to teach and to nurture and to encourage, you have to take that with your staff too, because you have been appointed in charge of these people. All right. Even though some of them might be in the league longer than you have, some of them might have more experience, some of them may have been head coaches at other levels. You are the head coach of the New York Giants. So if let's say your offensive line unit isn't performing up to snuff, what good is it during the game to yell at that person, that coach, and just, put them on blast? You don't think that that coach sees it and recognizes it and feels bad about it? So instead of just yelling, just whatever happened to the collaboration method? Supposedly during the week, Dable and his staff collaborate on everything, the game plan, the practice schedules, you name it, personnel, all that stuff. Why does that collaboration have to go away on game day? Because you're in the heat of the moment? Mm-mm, not an excuse. So I would hope, and not just for his health, because I've said this before, when you're constantly popping off, you're raising your blood pressure. And I don't know what his health status is or, what kind of physical condition he might be in. But I do know that if you are constantly popping off, that can't be good for your blood pressure. So I would hope if nothing else, he would find a way to be a little bit more chill, even as hard as it might be. All right. Maybe show that composure that you show with the media after a game when you've just gotten your backside handed to you by your opponent. We have to coach better. We have to teach better. We have to practice better. Take that same approach, because yelling is not going to solve anything. It's just going to make you look like an ogre. It's going to make people dislike you. It's going to make people want to leave your staff. And it's just going to, it's going to spread your reputation. Now, disclaimer here. Obviously, I am not in the coaching meetings. I am not privy to, the reactions, whether Dable blasts people or he sits them down and calmly says, hey, Andre Patterson, for example. Hey, Andre, what happened with the defensive line in the third quarter on that third down play? Or is he just yelling and saying, what the heck are you guys doing? I don't know that. Nobody knows that except the people that are in that room. But, usually where there's smoke, there's fire. And if, we have seen Dable, pop off on the sideline. And it just needs to be directed constructively, is what I'm saying. And, if Dable's going to get up there and say, this is who I am, okay, that concerns me a little bit, because anybody who gets up there and says, this is who I am, love me or hate me, but I'm not changing, we can all stand to change. We can all stand to grow. Tom Coughlin grew, all right? He came in, remember, those of you who remember when he first came in, he was a hard-nosed coach. His players did not care for him. A lot of them did not, all right? Coughlin was so on the wrong side of the players that they actually reported him to the NFLPA because he was in violation of the CBA rules. You think if they had liked him, that they would have done that? Probably not. But Coughlin changed. He became, more willing to build relationships, constructive relationships. That didn't mean that he got soft. That didn't mean that he let guys get away with, slacking off or anything like that. But he became a little bit more of a player's coach, if you will. Dable, right, from all accounts, is a player's coach. He does pop off. We've seen it. He just needs to be, based on what we have seen and what's come out, just be an overall type of people's coach, if you will. Doesn't mean that you have to be soft. Doesn't mean that you have to run a country club. Doesn't mean that you have to, look the other way if somebody screws up. But popping off and getting all emotional doesn't solve anything other than, the only thing it does is it creates ill will and bad feelings. So my hope is that as Dable sits down and he looks at his own performance. Don't just sit there and say, this is who I am, love me or not. But that he sits down and he looks at himself and he says, okay, this is what I can do better to be a better head coach, a better mentor, a better teacher, just better overall. So with that, I think will also contribute to the progress that hopefully we see this team make moving forward. All right, coming up next, I'm going to go there. Yep. I'm going to tell you why I think the Giants should run it back with Daniel Jones for this year. And before you turn off the program, hear me out on this, all right? Because it kind of makes sense if you think about it. I'll tell you right after this. Hey, Giant fans, are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drivers and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. And gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. In short, the 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-side crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, which has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. So go on and take the Nissan Rogue or the Nissan Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. You got Patricia Traina here on this Friday, the 16th of February. We are almost done with the month. The scouting combine coming up in a couple weeks. Going to be a lot to talk about, a lot of stuff. And we, of course, here at the Locked On Giants podcast will have all of it for you as we get it. So hope you will stay tuned in. And of course, don't forget to check out my written work over on Giants Country. We're putting out a lot more content this time of year. So this way you never miss anything. So anyway, why should the Giants run it back with Daniel Jones? Why does it make sense this year? And I can just hear the groans now. People are saying, oh, no, what are you doing? You got to move on from Daniel Jones. We've got to cut the cord. We've got to get a new quarterback, whether it's a veteran, whether it's a draft pick. Hear me out on this, folks. First off, I do believe the Giants are going to add to the quarterback room. They have to. Joe Schoen has said it. I do believe they're going to bring in a veteran. You know, he has said that, if Daniel is not ready from his ACL rehab, that they want a guy who can come in and potentially win some games for them if he has to start. I do think that they are going to add a quarterback as well in the draft, whether it's first round, that I'm not so sure about. But I could see somebody maybe coming in day 2. All right. So here's the scenario. I believe with the quarterback situation, what the Giants are going to do is sort of similar to what they did when they brought in Tyrod Taylor. If you remember, they signed Tyrod Taylor because they weren't really sure what they were going to get from Daniel Jones at the time. They had declined his 5th-year option, and they brought in Tyrod Taylor, and they structured that contract in such a way that if Taylor started, he got a bump in his pay raise. If he didn't, then he had a modest, salary that he earned as the backup. The difference here, though, is that if the Giants do add a young quarterback, and again, I do think they will, not necessarily in round 1, unless they buck, the trends and they go up and they trade for one, which I still say doesn't make sense, at least as of this writing. But I do think, a quarterback is in the mix. And the reason why I say it kind of makes sense to run it back with Daniel Jones, if he is healthy, is twofold. Number one, we all know he's going to be on the roster. His salary cap figure makes it impossible for the Giants to cut him. They're just not getting rid of him. Whether you like it or not, he's going to be on this roster. Now, this is, of course, the escape hatch year. After this year, the Giants can move on from him if they want to. So let's say, for example, the Giants bring in a veteran. Let's just pick a name out of the hat. Let's say it's Jacoby Brissett. They draft a quarterback in the second round. Again, let's pick a name out of the hat. Let's say it's J.J. McCarthy out of Michigan. Do you honestly think J.J. McCarthy is going to be ready to roll week one? Probably not. They're going to probably want to develop him a little bit, help him acclimate to the NFL, get him ready, learn the offense, make sure that the offensive line is stabilized, get the receiving game up to snuff, have everything ready for when the transition ultimately comes. So in the interim, you have Daniel Jones who knows the system. You let him play it out. For as long as he's healthy, you let him play it out. So this way you can take your time. If you do bring in a young player, you can develop him. You don't have to rush him out there. Because look, you go back to 2019, and I will say this until I'm blue in the face. I feel that the Giants rushed Daniel Jones into the starting lineup. He wasn't ready. They were so desperate to get him into the starting lineup because of his mobility, which Eli Manning did not have. And, in rushing Daniel into the starting lineup, they didn't have a solid offensive line. They didn't really have, a number one receiver. They didn't have a lot of things. So they set him up to fail. And then when they started to, fire coaches and offensive coordinators and all this stuff, they further set him up to fail. So if you are bringing in a young quarterback, don't do that. Don't rush him out there. This team, regardless of what they do, as far as personnel changes, they're not going to win a Super Bowl. They're not even going to come close to the Super Bowl. I'm telling you that right now. And that's just a reality. There's just a lot that has to be done, a lot of progress that needs to be made. And you could say, oh, well, teams can get lucky. The Lions that came close. Yeah, but the Lions got better over, gradually. They just didn't go from worst to first, So that being said, you give the young quarterback, if you bring one in, which again, I think they will, you give him time to develop. You make sure everything around him is stabilized. Then you make the transition at the right time, whether that's midway through the season, whether that's, if God forbid Daniel gets hurt again, which, I don't wish injury on anybody. Now you say to yourself, okay, well, why would you want to carry, another quarterback, a veteran quarterback? Here's the thing, folks. If Daniel Jones plays relatively well once he gets back, potentially you could look to see if after this year, maybe you can move him in a trade. Now, I know you're thinking, who the heck's going to trade for Daniel Jones? But hear me out on this. If Jones rebounds and plays like he did in 2022, and he's healthy and he avoids the injury bug, you don't think there's going to be teams out there that will be looking for a quarterback, a veteran quarterback, to come in and serve as either a stopgap or a starter or whatever? There usually are every year. You find them every year. And if the Giants can do that, all right, let's take a look at Jones's 2025 cap hit, all right? 12 million of his 30 million base salary in 2025 becomes fully guaranteed as of March 15th, 2025. So Jones has a good year, even if it's part of the year, and you can move him in a trade, you're going to save a lot of money. How much, you ask? You're going to save $19.395 million on the base salary. You're going to take a $22.21 million dead money hit. But again, the salary cap is going to go up. And if that's the worst you have to take as a potential hit, it's not bad. I mean, usually you want the savings to be a little bit higher than the dead money hit. But because they restructured Jones last year, that's not going to be the case. All right. Now, let's say they hold on to Jones. They don't manage to do a trade before, the guaranteed money kicks in. If they do a post June 1st trade, and again, if a team loses a starter due to injuries and they want to, gamble, run the risk of, gamble here because um, maybe they can hold on to him. And I don't think, by the way, they would do this because you don't know if you're going to be able to move him. If they do a post June 1st trade, they save $30.5 million and they have a dead money hit of $11.105 million in 2025 and 2026, which is a little bit better. But again, I don't think it'll come down to that because you can't just sit there and say, oh, somebody will get hurt and we'll be able to move them. You got to kind of move your guy before the draft, in my opinion. And I might also point out that the early word on the 2025 quarterback class is that it's not as good as the 2024 class. So again, you'll always have teams looking for a quarterback. And if the Giants get themselves a young guy to come in to be their future, if Daniel Jones is not it, you try and you move Daniel for trade assets. Stranger things have happened, folks. Don't sit there and tell me, oh, who's going to trade for Daniel Jones? Stranger things have happened. And it's not as far-fetched as you think. It's contingent, obviously, on a lot of things, how he performs, whether they get the rookie guy that they want. And I do believe they will take a young quarterback because, as I discussed yesterday with Justin Pennick, if they go and they get their quarterback, Brian Dable and Joe Shane, they are going to buy themselves some time in order to continue rebuilding this team and getting this team on track. And it just makes sense to do it. So that's why, ladies and gentlemen, I think it makes sense for the Giants' intention, at any rate, as of right now, to run it back with Daniel Jones, at least to start the season. The team's probably not going anywhere. You do want to see progress. I mentioned, the milestones that I'd like to see in the first segment of this show. If you're thinking about a deep playoff run, if you're thinking about Super Bowl for next year, that's not happening. Baby steps is what it's going to take. So you got to think positively. Ideally, I think the Giants would like for Daniel Jones to be the guy. And if they end up drafting another guy and it turns out that Daniel Jones proves to be that he could be the guy, then maybe you look to flip the younger guy at some point. I don't know. But that's how I kind of see the quarterback situation playing out. That's what I think is going to happen. And it's contingent, obviously, on what they do in the draft, but that's how I see it playing out. So, all right, everybody, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. To my Blue Crew community members, no Q&A this weekend, but next week I will have information on our community mock draft. Make sure you look for that. So everybody, thank you again. Have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday.